Alright, so a quick update. The battery finally died. Well, not completely. The lights and stuff worked, but not quite enough juice to fire up and run the furnace or the fridge, evidently. When I got out of the bed, it was really cold in here. We made it till almost 11 p.m., and that is the quick update. Well, here is day 3, and we're going to go over all the different things that we had set up in the camper. Before I get started though, and give a quick update of where we are, I'd like to remind you, or at least tell you about the video series here. So this is part 3. If you haven't seen the first part or the second part, a lot of this may not make sense to you. So go back to the channel, look up the playlist for boondocking test, and you'll see the first 2. So you can go watch those. Anyway, we're going to get into talking about how it all turned out and how we got where we are. In the meantime, I'm out here with the dogs again playing. Again, you'll see those in the previous videos. I think we're going to play a little hide and seek, and then we're going to get into talking about the camper and how the process turned out for us. Good job. Hey, Chris. Hey, King. Hey. Good boy. Good boy. All right, so to get into the details of what happened over the last couple of days and all that stuff combined together, I think I'm gonna take it inside the camper here because it is freaking cold out here. It's like 40 degrees and windy and just freezing. So instead of bundling all up and putting a bunch of clothes on, we'll head into the camper and talk about what's happened over the last couple of days. All right, so before we get into all the details, I just want to remind you one more time that if you haven't seen the first video of this 3-video series, to hop back over there and see that video. I'll leave a link down in the description, as well as you can see the tags up here above my head. You could jump back to that one and watch that one. So on day 1, we had to prep everything inside of the RV. I wanted to make sure I had plenty of water and empty gray tanks and black tanks so that they could be used. And I wanted to make sure that the battery was good to go. So we had to make sure that we had plenty of charge on the battery so that we could get a true result. So everything charged up. So the reason for doing this test over the last 3 days is so that you can kind of have an idea of how you can use your camper if you want to go somewhere and you don't have any connections, hookups, or anything like that. You're just going to run off of what your RV is capable of doing for you. So on day 1, the tanks were already empty and we filled up to fresh water so that I had something to run inside. So I wanted to take a shower. The reason for wanting to take a shower is because I wanted the water heater to actually cycle. So it runs off of propane to keep the water hot. And in order to get that to cut on and off frequently is to actually take a shower. Something else that I did was to have extra lighting. Things like this light right here. It's a battery operated light. The reason I have this is so that I could use less lights like the one up here above my head or the other ones on the ceiling, because those run off of the RV battery itself. This one here I can run without having to be actually hooked up to the camper. So I charge it up and I use it, and that way I have plenty of light. Other things that I would do is take the temperature in the RV at night before I go to bed and actually take it down. So I liked it to be around 68 to 70 degrees, but I knew with the nights getting cold that the propane furnace would cut on and it would try to run longer, trying to keep the inside warm. So what I would do is take the temperature that I have it set to down some at night when I'm bundled up inside the bed. That way I stay warm and the inside of the RV doesn't have to work as hard to stay as warm as I would normally want it, around that 68 to 70 degrees. Inside of my RV, I have the meter that I can watch the battery. Now, I can't watch how much voltage and amperage and all that stuff that I'm using. What I can see, though, is how much power I have left out of the battery. So on my meter on the wall back here, I have 4 dots. Those 4 dots indicate from the top being full all the way down to the bottom being empty. So when I started off, I had the 4 lights, and as it goes, I start to see the little lights start to drop off as it gets lower and lower, and I was able to monitor it. And if you go back and watch the first and the second video, you'll notice in the videos, I talk about how I wasn't sure if I was going to make it the last night or not because of how much power had been consumed by the indicator on that panel. As far as the tanks go, as far as having water and filling up the gray tank and all that stuff, I took 1 shower, and I did not take it easy on that shower either. I really wanted that water heater to work, and I took a full shower, kind of like you would at home, and I filled up half of my tank in 1 shower. Now we'll do another video one day talking about how much water you can use in a shower and how to conserve and all that mess. We'll get into that another day, but I wanted that water heater to really work because I wanted the electricity to run off of the battery to see how well it could do. I did all this at the comforts of the house. So I stayed in the camper. I did everything in the camper, but I was at my home. That way I had a reassurance that if something went wrong or something like that, then I was able to get back to where I could be safe, warm, comfortable, whatever you want to call it. I was able to plug back in, and I'll explain all the results of that in just a second. As far as propane usage goes, I have a refrigerator that needs a propane. I have the oven and stove if I wish to use it, and I have the water heater that needs to keep the water hot that also uses propane. So the propane usages that I did use was the refrigerator. I left that on, and I left the water heater on the whole time. Through the whole period of this whole test, I left the water heater on so that it had to maintain the temperature in the water tank. I also used the propane stove to heat up water for my coffee in the mornings. So for the limitations of our RV, so I have no solar, I don't have any external methods of charging the battery or anything like that through this test. With all that, the limiting factor of how long I could stay inside of my RV in the temperatures and the conditions that I was in was all based off of the capacity of the battery itself. So when I checked how much electricity or how much battery I had left 24 hours later, so 3:30 in the afternoon on the very next day, then I had about a half a battery left. So that's where I was talking about in the previous videos about whether or not I wasn't sure if I was going to make it another night or not. So you ask, how long did it last? So it made it all the way to about 10:30, 11 o'clock on that night. So if you look at the total hours, from 3:30 on the first day all the way to 3:30 on the following day, that's 24 hours, and I made it another 7 or so hours after that. So if you put all that together, we're looking at about 34 hours or so. Now, we did have kind of a warm day in the middle of that, which extended the period. So if you put it all together, we lasted about 24 to 34 hours, somewhere in there. So looking at all that, that is about the constraints of the RV. It's not the water, it's not the propane, it's the battery itself. One single old battery that is a lead acid battery, and it gave up first out of everything that we did inside of the RV. So before I get to talking about how the furnace operates and why I think it took up most of the power of the battery, I want to explain real quick why I did this test. The reason for the test is that the wife and I like to boondock. At least we like to go out the day before we're going to get to a campground and stay overnight somewhere, and we've always wondered how long is our rig going to last in the event that we want to stay somewhere for, a half a day or a day before we get to an actual campground. So back to the furnace that keeps the camper warm in conditions like this, and why I think it's the biggest consumer out of this whole test period. So there's 2 factors in which the battery gets consumed by the furnace itself. The first of which isn't really that big of a power consumer, and that is the igniter. The igniter that ignites the flame in order for the furnace to get hot to put hot air inside of the RV. The second one is what I think is the major player in the consumption of power of the battery, which is the fan inside of the furnace. So in order for the furnace to get all that nice hot air inside of your RV to keep it warm, it has to run a blower or a fan to blow all that air around your RV. And the whole time that that fan is running, so every time the furnace needs to come on to maintain temperature and that fan is running, it's pulling power from the battery. So the momentary switches like your fridge, the water heater, and the furnace, in order to just ignite the very first time, isn't a big consumer, but the fan inside of the furnace is, because it's running the whole time. Now there's other options that you can do with your RV to last longer. You can install solar, or you can buy a battery pack. You can get extra batteries. You could do a bunch of different things, but I wanted you to be able to understand what the RV would do if you were to buy it straight off the lot and go straight into a boondocking situation where you don't have any electrical power, you don't have any water hookups or anything like that, and about how long you think you might last. If you have any questions about this 3-day test, then leave it down in the comments below. And until the next time, enjoy your RV, understand its capabilities, and God bless.